Well, thank you so much, Gavin, for that introduction. Technically, it's a TEDx talk. It was TEDx Denver, not TED. I didn't make it to the main TED stage yet, so that'll be happening hopefully sometime soon. And I want to thank Mark and Ann, of course, for having me here. This is something that's a little different than what's been talked about before, but I hope and I expect that given this audience, everybody here will immediately see the value of what we're talking about, the value of having an Earth archive, a digital twin that preserves the world as it exists today before it changes fundamentally due to the climate crisis. And today I want to talk about that, and I want to talk a little bit, as Gavin mentioned, about how I came to that place where to begin to understand that we need to have this digital twin. And I will be drawing from my TED Talk here. The most astounding place I've ever been is the Mosquitia jungle in Honduras. I've done archaeological field work all over the world. And so venturing into this place, I thought I knew what to expect, but I was wrong. First of all, it's freezing. It's 90 degrees, but you're soaking wet from the humidity. And the canopy of trees is so thick, sunlight never reaches the surface. You can't get dry. Immediately I knew I didn't bring enough clothing. That first night, I felt things moving underneath my hammock, unknown creatures brushing and poking against the thin nylon fabric. And I could barely sleep through all the noise. The jungle is loud, it's shockingly loud, like being downtown in a bustling city. And as the night wore on, I became increasingly frustrated with my sleeplessness, knowing I had a full day ahead. When I finally got up at dawn, it was clear that my sense of unseen things was all too real. There were hoof prints, paw prints, linear snake tracks everywhere. And even more shocking, we saw those same animals in the daylight, and they were completely unafraid of us. They had no experience with people and no reason to be afraid. These images, not the snake image, but the other two images, are from game cameras that were put up in this place by Conservation International in 2017 and 2018. And they demonstrate exactly what we sort of experienced those first few days in the jungle, that there was an incredible diversity of wildlife in this place, and that they had no experience with people, especially the cats, or jaguars, pumas, all sorts of crazy stuff that typically just don't exist in Central America anymore, especially in these numbers. As I walked towards the undocumented ancient city, which is my reason for being there, I realized that this was the only place I'd ever been where I didn't see a single shred of plastic. That's how remote it was. And my exposure to this place had a fundamental impact on my thinking. It pushed me beyond my normal and very safe disciplinary boundaries. It made me think about how fragile and resilient the world is, and how much we have to lose from the climate crisis. It also pushed me to consider ways in which I can contribute to climate crisis solutions. And I also began to understand that we know so little about our world. And if I had Elon Musk here in the room and I was just talking to him, I would say, dude, let's go to Mars. Or at least someone should. I don't want to, but somebody should go to Mars. I get the whole Mars is a lifeboat thing. But we have so much to learn about our own planet. And we can do that at a fraction of the cost of a Mars run. And the tech and the social know-how we develop for that effort on our own planet is directly transferable to space. If we need to scan the entire planet, our own Earth, we're going to have to do the same thing to Mars. And some of the tech will be a little different, but the basic gist of it will be the same. And I want to also give a shout out here, just as an aside, to Trimble and Frontier Precision. We rented GPS units from Frontier Precision in Denver, Trimble units. And I know a lot of those folks are here today, so I just wanted to show them some of their tech, some of their equipment in action. We were able to, this is probably arguably some of the densest cover in the world. This is a 50-meter canopy, 52-meter canopy actually. It's as dense as anything in the Amazon. It's comparable to the Amazon. And the Trimble tech worked in this dense cover. We were able to get a signal even in the middle of this jungle environment. And here I have a handheld GPS, a handheld computer, and you can see that we were able to directly upload all of our different visualizations that were derived from airborne LiDAR into those GPS units and use them to navigate into in this environment. And if you ingest certain jungle plants, this is what the jungle will actually look like to you. No, obviously I'm just kidding. But I think these are great visualizations. Perhaps it's surprising to hear that there are still places on Earth that are so untouched by people, but it's true. There's still thousands of places where humans haven't stepped for centuries or maybe forever. And honestly, it's a great time. It's an amazing time to be an archaeologist. We have the tools and the technology to understand our planet like never before. And yet we're running out of time. The Earth, our cultural and ecological patrimony, is threatened by the climate crisis. I feel an urgency to my work that I didn't feel 20 years ago. How can we document everything before it's too late? And so I have, for the title of this slide, I have the archaeology's age of discovery. And I think and this might be surprising to some people, but I think that archaeology has finally reached its age of discovery, and it's absolutely amazing. But it's a little frightening at the same time. I was trained as a traditional archaeologist using methodologies that have been around since the 50s. And that all changed in July 2009 in Michoacan, Mexico. I was studying the ancient Purépecha Empire, a lesser known but equally impressive counterpart of the Aztec. 2 weeks earlier, my team had discovered an ancient settlement, so we were painstakingly documenting building foundations by hand, hundreds of them. Basic archaeological protocol is to find the edge of a settlement so you know what you're up against. And my graduate students convinced me to do just that. So I grabbed a couple of Cliff Bars, some water, a walkie, and I set out alone on foot, expecting to encounter the edge in just a few minutes. Minutes passed, and then an hour. Finally, I reached the opposite side of the Malpais. Oh, I said out loud, there were ancient foundations all the way across. It's a city? Oh shit, it's a city. Turns out this seemingly small settlement was an ancient urban megalopolis, 26 square kilometers in size. A lost city with as many building foundations as modern day Manhattan. An archaeological site so big that it would take me decades, the entire rest of my career, to survey fully, which was exactly how I didn't want to spend the entire rest of my career. Exhausted, sweating, placating stressed out graduate students, tossing scraps of PB&J sandwiches to feral dogs, which is pointless, by the way, because Mexican dogs have no interest in peanut butter. Just the thought of it bored me to tears. So I returned home to Colorado and poked my head through a colleague's door. Dude, there's got to be a better way. He asked if I'd heard of this new technology called LiDAR, light detection and ranging. I looked it up. LiDAR involves shooting a dense grid of infrared beams from an airplane toward the ground. What you get is a high-resolution scan of the Earth's surface and everything on it. Not an actual image, but a dense, three-dimensional cloud of points. And today and tomorrow we've heard many explanations and new ways of examining these point cloud data. In 20, 50, 60, 100 years from now, we're going to be able to take these same records that we're collecting today and ask questions and use technologies that we can't even dream of today. We're sort of just beginning to learn how to use these point cloud records. I had just enough left in the budget for a scan, so we did just that. We used Merrick and Company from here in Colorado for our first scan. Merrick went to Mexico, flew the LiDAR, sent back the data. Over several months, I learned to practice digital deforestation, which is a term that I have stolen from Ron Chappell, who's one of the speakers tomorrow. Filtering away trees, brush, and other vegetation to reveal the ancient cultural landscape below. When I looked at my first visualization, I began to cry. In just 45 minutes, the LiDAR scan collected the same amount of data as what would have taken decades by hand. Every house foundation, road, building, terrace, and pyramid, in incredibly high resolution, representing thousands of people who were born, loved, lived, and died in these spaces. And what's more, the quality of these data was not comparable to traditional archaeological research. It was much, much better. I knew this technology would change the entire field of archaeology in the coming years, and it did, along with my career and my personal trajectory, I guess. Our work caught the attention of a group of filmmakers searching for a legendary lost city in Honduras. They failed in their quest, but discovered a lost culture now buried under a tropical wilderness using LiDAR. I agreed to help interpret their data, and that's how I found myself deep in that Mosquitia jungle, plastic-free and filled with curious animals. Curious is probably a bit of an understatement. Terrifying animals maybe is a better way of putting it. Our goal was to verify that the archaeological features we identified using LiDAR were actually there on the ground, and indeed they were. 11 months later, I returned with a crack team of archaeologists and other scientists supported by the National Geographic Society and the Honduran government. The only way into this place, which we now call the City of the Jaguar, is by helicopter. It is a true tropical wilderness. There are, in the way that we think of wilderness, there are no roads, no people, no electricity, no internet, no cell phone. It's kind of like heaven, actually. Completely disconnected from the 21st century in this place. And ironically, the people that lived there centuries before were intimately connected to the world around them. It's a place of these incredible juxtapositions like this. The helicopters are terrifying. This in 2016, when we went back, we used Hueys that were, many of them had been used in Vietnam. They were sort of that old, kind of a little terrifying, frankly. In a month at this place, we excavated over 400 objects at what we now call City of the Jaguar. The reason that we went back was because we felt a moral and ethical responsibility to protect the site as best we could. since we had discovered it, documented it, and since it had gotten such incredible press. But in the short time that we were there, the site inevitably changed. Gone was the tiny gravel bar where we first landed our helicopter. The grass was chopped down, the trees removed to create a large landing zone for several helicopters at once. Without it, after just one rainy season, the ancient canals we'd seen in our LiDAR scan were damaged or destroyed. In the Eden I described, soon had large clearings and a central camp with lights and a small outdoor chapel. In short, it absolutely broke my heart to see the changes that had happened there. And it transformed me in a personal way that moved me beyond archaeology into trying to do something else to help solve the climate crisis. And here you can actually see some of those objects that we excavated and that were recovered and that were immediately turned over to the Honduran government. And they have actually created a small museum outside of Catacamas, Honduras, where these artifacts are housed and studied, and where people can actually go and look at the objects today and see how they're actually being curated and studied. So in other words, despite our best efforts to preserve the landscape as it was, things changed. Our initial LiDAR scan is now the only record of the city of the Jaguar as it existed just a few years ago. And broadly speaking, this is a problem for archaeologists. It's impossible to study an area without changing it in some way. And regardless, the earth is changing. Ancient sites are destroyed. History is lost. Just last year, we watched in horror as the Notre Dame Cathedral went up in flames. The iconic spire collapsed and the roof was all but destroyed. Miraculously, though, art historians Andrew Tallon and Paul Blair scanned the cathedral using LiDAR in 2010. At the time, their goal was to understand how the building was constructed. Now their LiDAR scan is the most comprehensive record of the cathedral, and it'll be invaluable to the reconstruction. They never could have anticipated the fire or how their scan would be used, but we're lucky to have it. We take for granted that our cultural heritage will be around forever. It won't. Organizations like SciArc are doing incredible work to scan historical monuments, but nothing similar exists for the Earth's landscapes. We've already lost 50% of the world's rainforests. We're losing 18 million acres of forest each year. And rising sea levels will make whole cities, countries, and continents unrecognizable. Unless we have a record of these places, no one in the future will even know they existed. Notre Dame is a tragedy, but to my way of thinking, we are losing hundreds of natural cathedrals, 3 football fields every minute by some calculations, in the Amazon alone. And the real tragedy is that we will never know what we have lost. If the Earth is the Titanic, we've hit the iceberg, everyone's on deck, and the orchestra is playing. The climate crisis threatens to destroy our cultural patrimony within a few decades. But sitting on our hands and doing nothing is not an option. Shouldn't we save everything we can on the lifeboats? The lifeboats for the planet Earth, maybe not for the planet Mars. Looking at my LiDAR scans for Mexico and Honduras, it's clear that we need to scan as much as possible, as quickly as possible before it's too late. That's what inspired the Earth Archive, an unprecedented scientific effort to LiDAR scan the entire surface of the planet, starting with the areas most threatened. At a high resolution, something that's equivalent to at least a product that can be manufactured at 25 centimeter pixels, that is accessible to as many people as possible. We are aware of and applaud previous calls to use remote sensing technologies, such as LiDAR, to record broad areas of the Earth. There are several national initiatives, such as 3DEP, which is awesome in the United States, and many parts of Europe, etc. But these efforts are limited in geographic distribution at a global scale, with resolutions that are inadequate for many applications, such as those needed for cultural heritage management. The purpose of the Earth Archive is threefold. Number one, create a baseline record of the Earth as it is today, to more effectively mitigate the climate crisis. The only way to measure change is to compare two sets of data, a before and an after. Right now, we don't have a high resolution before data set for most of the planet. So we don't know how things are changing and whether our efforts to combat climate change are making a positive impact. Number two, build a virtual planet accessible to any number of scientists, so we can better understand our world today. Archaeologists like me can discover undocumented settlements. Ecologists can study forest composition, tree size, age, distribution. Geologists can study hydrology, faults, and disturbance, and so on. And honestly, for this audience, I don't think I have to belabor the point that a value can simply not be placed on this kind of record. And number three, preserve a record of the Earth for our grandchildren's grandchildren, so they can study and recreate our lost cultural and ecological heritage in the future. As science and technology advance, they'll apply tools, algorithms, and AI to LiDAR scans done today and ask questions that we can't currently conceive of. Like Notre Dame, we can't imagine how these records will be used, but we know that they'll be critically important. The Earth Archive is the ultimate gift to future generations. Because the truth is, I won't live long enough to see its full impact. Neither will you, but that's exactly why it's worth doing. The Earth Archive is a bet on the future of humankind. A bet that together, collectively, as people and as scientists, that we will face the climate crisis and that we'll choose to do the right thing, not just for us today, but to honor those who came before us and to pay it forward to future generations. We'll carry on our legacy. So what is the status of the Earth Archive today? We have many technical grand challenges that we need to resolve for the Earth Archive, but they're tech challenges. They're solvable. The real grand challenges are the social ones. Those will be the hardest to solve. Those are the ones that we're working the hardest on now. Things like getting permissions, access, capacity building, which is critical, and analytics, and getting this information into the hands of vulnerable populations. That will be the true test of the Earth Archive, not necessarily the tech. Our first campaign is centered on scanning in the Amazon, and we had planned on starting that work this spring. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, those plans have been put on hold, probably until there's a vaccine. But this doesn't mean that we're not doing things. We have several exciting announcements and activities that we'll be working on this year, namely an Earth Archive Congress that we'll be having in the spring of 2021, and we're looking for partners and participants for that. We've partnered with Voxel Maps, and Peter Atala is going to talk about Voxel Maps here, I think either today or tomorrow. as a 21st century platform to house and hold the Earth archive data. And we've started looking for and started partnerships with other corporate NGO, private individuals, et cetera. So today it's time for everyone to take action and decide how they can contribute to climate crisis solutions. Because the fact is, we cannot rely on politicians or other organizations to make meaningful decisions. Change must be a grassroots effort, which we know can be highly impactful. One example of this is marijuana. When I was in college, there was a group of people that would put on their Sunsplash tie-dye t-shirts, chant legalize it, and advocate for marijuana reform in downtown East Lansing every Sunday. And I was always like, you guys are just wasting your time. They are never going to legalize pot in this country. Boy, was I wrong. It's the only time I've ever been wrong, actually. In the same way, we must begin populist, grassroots efforts for climate solutions. A couple of years ago, I gave an interview for NPR's Morning Edition. I think they could tell how nervous I was, because before the interview, they tried to warm me up a little bit by talking generally about archaeology. And I didn't realize they were taping. So I tongue-in-cheek delivered one of my standard professorial lines. Being an archaeologist is a curse in that you never see the world as it is. You are always reconstructing how it was and imagining how it will be in the future. Amazingly, thanks to the pandemic, we have a time machine. We no longer have to imagine what the world will look like in 2040. And as illustrated by this slide, this is LA, 1970, 2009 in the middle, and then this year, post the shutdown, the clearest LA has ever been, maybe ever, clearest air ever for LA. We've been given an incredible window into the future, and I hope that we won't squander it. The global reset has given us the opportunity to decide what sort of environment we desire moving forward. We will create a vaccine for COVID-19, hopefully soon, and return to a familiar but fundamentally changed lifeway. But COVID is just a warm-up for humanity's 21st century grand challenge, solving the climate crisis. And I and many other people, and hopefully you too, believe that the Earth Archive is fundamental to any meaningful climate solution. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Fisher. That was fascinating, and it's quite an ambitious initiative. And I'm glad you told the backstory about your light bulb moment in the jungle. So a couple of questions that have popped up were about details, more about, could you repeat about the positional accuracy you're proposing for the global model?
We want something that we can make products from that are in the 25 centimeter pixel range. So I believe that's something on the order of 25 ground shots, 25 bare earth shots per square meter or so. So something that's fairly high resolution. And that's incidentally, that's the resolution that we have that we're using for our airborne LiDAR. That archaeologists are using for their airborne LiDAR. So that's the resolution for things that we have from both Honduras with a 52-meter canopy and from Mexico, which has a 27-meter canopy, so more of a normal canopy.
Okay, so and we could probably go into talking about the different styles of LiDAR, the single point, single photon and so on, but I won't go off that far in that tangent. But there are people here that most people here probably know way more about the tech specs of LiDAR than I do. But
So yeah, I'll get into the weeds if I get too far into that.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that there's so many other lateral uses for this data besides the archaeology and the climate study, plate tectonics, looking at public safety, landslide detection of potential landslides, the volcanism, studying things over time. How often do you think that the global model would need to be updated? I mean, there's going to be the one-time capture over a long period of time, but how often do you think it would need to be updated?
The most valuable kinds of data are the time sequence data. So, and you know, the instrumentation, until we get a spaceborne instrument, which I've been told is somewhere maybe 20 years away. A spaceborne instrument, they'll give us the kind of resolutions that we sort of desire. We need to scan again. Each time we scan, the resolution of that and the ease of using that instrumentation is going to be better. But the problem is the Earth is changing so rapidly, we can't hang on and wait for the ultimate airborne instrument. We have to do that now. And then we have to use those time sequence data. And what's fascinating to me as an archaeologist is that, and you know, we can predict ways that the data will be used in fields that people that will use the data, ways that they'll use the data, et cetera. But some of the most innovative uses for these data are going to be things that we haven't thought of. And one example of that is the way that archaeologists are using airborne satellite data from the Cold War for the Near East. And they're actually going back through those data using new algorithms to increase the resolution and take out a lot of the noise, and finding archaeological sites and features on the landscape that don't exist there anymore. And there are several recent publications that talk about some of these classes of features that people had no idea about. One of them are these features that are called holloways, which are roads between Mesopotamian cities. And now all of these holloways have been completely destroyed. But in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, many of them were still there. And by pouring through and reanalyzing these old satellite photographs, people have been able to actually reconstruct these ancient road networks and, amazingly, find roads to cities that don't exist anymore. And in that same way, I expect people will be able to pour through these point cloud data sometime in the future and find things and use them in ways that we can't even imagine right now.
Okay, a couple of questions have popped up. Kirk H. asked, how can you incorporate the USGS National Elevation Dataset project into your Earth Archive project? Probably similar to, like you said, other initiatives in other countries, but the USGS one as an example.
We'd love to mirror those data, and I think we probably can when we get the Earth Archive set up, and we'll integrate them into the platform in the same way that we had just about talked about using that time sequence data. And in some places, those 3-depth data will be the first in that sequence. And for many applications, we don't need the high-res data that we're sort of talking about for cultural heritage management or other sorts of things. So 3-depth and the other data from other places in the world can be folded right into the Earth Archive, and we hope that we would be able to get access to those records and make them and open source them. And that's one thing that I think is really, really critical to the proper functioning of the Earth Archive, is to open source the data as much as we possibly can.
Okay. Another question from Tom B. said, fantastic presentation. It reminds me of the ocean mapping initiative with ROVs going on currently. What about the the ocean floor. Is that something under the scope of the Earth Archive as well?
No, we're just talking about and absolutely the same thing needs to be done for the ocean floor, and lots of people have advocated for that for a long time. We're just focused on the land. The Earth Archive is just focused on the land surface of the planet, 29.2% of the planet. But we'd love to incorporate those. At some point in the future, maybe we would be able to incorporate those records as part of the Earth Archive. But that is not within the scope of our sort of current scanning initiative. Not to downplay the importance of the ocean mapping.
No, no, of course not. And that initiative, I can't find the link right now, but that's a good one. We've also put the link, your eartharchive.com link in the in the chat window. Encourage people to go check that out. Another question came up. You mentioned SciArc in your presentation. Are you collaborating with them?
I know the folks from SciArc pretty well. We're not collaborating with them right now, but we've certainly been in contact with them. I'm a huge fan of what they do, obviously, and we hope to work with them in the future.
Okay. Well, you talked about it's not the technology; it's the paperwork, the bureaucracy. Often, it's the social side of it, and yeah. I anticipate that. Well, for instance, there's a number of companies doing a lot of scanning on spec or compiling their scans the same way the imaging is a service. Scanning is expensive, and they want to resell scan data. I'm sure that's not a roadblock, but something that you have to work out with these entities. How far along have you gotten without specifically naming companies? Have you had what kind of reception are you getting
from companies or from governments?
Companies.
It runs the gamut. There's lots of people that would love to sell us tech.
Yeah.
And I haven't. The interesting thing about but everybody's been generally fairly supportive. The interesting thing about the Earth Archive is that there was a lot of opposition to some of the work that we had done in Honduras for a whole variety of reasons, which which we don't have to get into, but academic reasons and other sorts of stuff. But everybody's been incredibly positive about the Earth Archive. There's been some, people have been, well, it's impossible or whatever, but the basic, which I don't think that's true, but the basic gist of the Earth Archive, everybody's been fairly supportive of it. The tech side of things, as I said before, and as you just mentioned, is resolvable. The social side of things is really, really difficult, especially open sourcing the data and the capacity building part. And that's where we anticipate a huge part of our effort is going to be running around to different countries, setting up commissions to help open source the data, run around, go into the field and teach indigenous people and local people and governmental officials just what they can do with the data, how they can use the data, help them store local copies of the records, and deal with the publicity for the things that we're going to find when we do these scans. And if we scan the Amazon, for example, we're going to find a lot of, amazing stuff, and people are going to be interested in that. And so we anticipate that a lot of our time is going to be spent dealing with the social, if that makes sense.
So, Chris, got time for a question here, and then I want to ask you to also tell us how people can get involved, a little bit more
Sure.
about your events you've got planned. So you're talking about the Amazon as one. Are you planning to map in Peru and Colombia as well?
The Amazon touches 9 countries. And right now we had hoped to begin scanning in Colombia in the spring, which has the the largest tract of Amazon wilderness left, I guess. It sounds kind of weird. People don't often use that term wilderness when they talk about the Amazon in Central America and et cetera, but all of the same issues and the same thinking that we have with wilderness in North America is basically the same sort of thing. So Colombia actually has the largest tract of Amazon wilderness that, in the way that we think of wilderness, left. And so we were going to begin scanning in Colombia. We've started to set up commissions in Peru and Ecuador. Brazil's kind of a black hole right now politically, but we fully expect that as we scan in some of these other countries and as they see the positive press and the benefits of doing the scans, that we'll be able to get the permissions to be able to do Brazil and some other places.
Okay, so wanted to give you the last couple minutes to talk about how people could get involved, and then talk again about these events that I know you talking with the organizers of this event. I believe that they're also involved in setting up some of your virtual events coming up. So how can people get involved?
So they can visit theeartharchive.com and please sign up for our mailing list. And of course, they can donate money, but they can also donate time. And we're also looking for people to begin to set up partnerships, corporate partnerships, and other things. We will have a bunch of events in the fall that will be announced on that website. And in spring 2020, we haven't set the ultimate date for that. We are going to have a very large online Earth Archive Congress where we're going to hash out some of these organizational issues that are associated with the Earth Archive. We're going to talk about the use of airborne LiDAR in general. We're going to have some academic talks, some case studies, some use cases for industry, some big major speakers to sort of talk about the role of the Earth Archive in climate crisis research and how we can sort of use it, and how to create a large sort of grassroots effort around the Earth Archive. So that'll be happening. And that'll be an online event, very similar to this event that we're participating in today and tomorrow. And that'll also be free, so people can, in global in nature, so people can dip in and out and participate in that as they desire. And that will be spring 2020. And we'll be putting up more information on the website about that event and sending it out on our mailing list.
Okay, thank you. A last minute question that just popped in, and you have actually just 1 minute to answer it. I hope it's not too big of a subject, but someone asks how have various property rights property right laws affected your initiative?
I assume they mean like individual property rights.
True,
and
yes.
Those are mostly for airborne work. A lot of those rights aren't applicable in the US. They might be applicable in other countries, but generally speaking, the elevations that the scanning, that the LiDARs, that the scanning is done from are outside of individual property rights. And of course, just like any sort of big mapping initiative, like OpenStreetMaps or Google Earth, we could potentially document sensitive things. And so that will be part of the process that we use for getting permissions and open sourcing the data is, how to deal with some of those more sensitive things that we might document.
Okay, so we're going to have to move on, but thank you again.
Thank you so much, everybody.